and welcome back to Haunted Echo. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy haunting echoes that linger in the darkness, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, I don't know why, Reddit is the only thing loading on my phone. My radio stopped working the second I walked into this building. My phone says there is no signal, and every attempt to call dispatch fails before the call even begins. I tried sending messages, emails, and even an emergency alert, but nothing went through. Somehow, after several minutes of refreshing different apps, Reddit opened. Maybe it is a glitch. Maybe plain text requires less of a connection than everything else. Maybe this post is not actually being uploaded, and I am only typing into a blank page that will disappear when my battery dies. I don't know. At this point, I don't care. I only need to leave some kind of record of what happened here. I don't know whether this will reach anyone, but if it does, someone needs to know where I am and what is moving through the halls outside this room. My name is not important right now. My body camera, badge number, and the case file will identify me if any of them are ever recovered. I am currently barricaded inside what used to be the security office of an abandoned family pizza restaurant. Something is moving through the building. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know what it looks like. More importantly, I know that it should not be capable of moving. The restaurant closed nearly 8 years ago. Before that, it had been a popular place for children's birthday parties. It had arcade machines, cheap pizza, flashing stage lights, and a group of animal mascots that performed songs for families. Over the course of 10 years, several children disappeared after visiting this place. The cases were never officially connected at first. Each disappearance happened months or years apart. Some children vanished from birthday parties. Others were last seen near the restrooms or arcade. One child disappeared while waiting for her father to bring the car around during a storm. No bodies were found. No clear suspect was identified. The restaurant owners denied any connection, and investigators never discovered enough evidence to prove that the children had been taken from inside the building. Security footage from the dates of the disappearances was either missing, damaged, or strangely incomplete. The restaurant eventually closed after the final child vanished. The official reason was financial failure. Everyone in town believed the disappearances were the real reason. Last week, our department received an anonymous envelope. Inside were several old blueprints of the restaurant. Someone had circled a section behind the employee restrooms and written 2 words in red ink. Look below. The plans showed an underground maintenance area that did not appear on any of the official building records. According to the measurements, the hidden area was almost as large as the restaurant itself. Since I work in missing persons, I was assigned to visit the property and confirm whether the hidden section existed. I was told not to expect much. The building had already been searched several times. Engineers had checked the foundation. Police dogs had gone through every room. Walls had been opened. The parking lot had even been partly excavated. Still, the blueprints looked real enough to justify another inspection. I arrived shortly after sunset. The building looked abandoned in the ordinary way. The parking lot was cracked, and thick weeds pushed through the asphalt. Several windows were shattered. The old sign leaned to one side, and the faded mascot painted across it had almost completely lost its color. The mascot had once been a smiling red fox wearing a blue jacket. Now its face was pale and empty, with dark marks running down from its eyes. Before entering, I completed a routine radio check. The signal was crystal clear. Dispatch joked that I should not let the old costumes scare me. I laughed and said I would ask the mascots for an autograph. I wished that conversation had lasted longer. The moment I stepped through the front doors, the radio filled with static. I tried calling dispatch again, but the only response was a sharp burst of noise. My phone behaved the same way. It had full service in the parking lot, but inside the building every bar disappeared. At the time, I blamed the reinforced concrete and old steel supports. The first hour was uneventful. I photographed the dining room, stage, arcade, kitchen, storage areas, and offices. Dust covered every surface. Mold had spread across the wallpaper. Birthday banners still hung from the ceiling, but the letters had faded so badly that I could no longer read them. Several tables were still arranged for parties. Paper plates sat in front of empty chairs. Plastic cups had collapsed inward with age. A cardboard birthday crown rested on the floor beneath one table. The arcade machines stood in rows along the wall. Their screens were dark, but a few still had coins trapped inside the return slots. The stage curtains were closed. I did not open them. Every room smelled of mildew, old grease, and damp carpet. Underneath those smells, however, there was something metallic. At first, it was faint. The farther I moved toward the back of the building, the stronger it became. It reminded me of wet coins, machine oil, and rust. The first unusual thing I noticed was not something I saw. It was a sound. A slow metallic groan came from somewhere beyond the kitchen. It sounded as though an overloaded chain had shifted under a great amount of weight. I followed it into the employee hallway. Every room was empty except for the restroom. I checked the storage closet, break room, manager's office, and cleaning area. Nothing appeared disturbed. There were no open windows and no signs that anyone had entered recently. Then I heard a second sound. I almost missed it because it was so quiet. Whispering, several voices seemed to be speaking at once. I could not understand the words, but the sound rose and fell like a group of children trying not to be heard. I searched for air vents, damaged pipes, and hidden speakers. The whispering was strongest inside the restroom. More specifically, it came from behind the final stall. I stepped inside and pressed my ear against the cold tiled wall. The voices stopped. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, dust drifted down from the ceiling. A thin seam appeared between the tiles. An entire section of the wall slowly moved inward with a deep, grinding sound. Behind it was a narrow hallway leading into complete darkness. The whispering ended at the exact moment the passage opened. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to press against my body. I should have called for backup before entering. I should have returned to the parking lot and waited for another unit. Instead, I stepped through the opening. The air inside the hidden passage was much colder. It carried the smell of old machine oil, rust, and something rotten. My flashlight revealed concrete walls, metal shelves, workbenches, and boxes filled with mechanical parts. Thick cables ran along the ceiling. Heavy chains hung from rails fixed above me. The hallway opened into an underground maintenance bay far larger than the blueprints had suggested. At first, I thought the chain supported machinery that had been left behind when the restaurant closed. Then my flashlight landed on a cracked mascot face. A second face hung beside it. Then a third. 7 animatronics were attached to reinforced hooks along the far wall. Each one stood close to 7 feet tall. I recognized some of them from old photographs in the missing person files. There was the red fox from the sign, a yellow bird wearing a chef's hat, a brown bear with a black bow tie, a green rabbit in a magician's jacket, a gray wolf dressed like a sailor, a pink cat wearing a party dress. The last mascot was something I had never seen in any promotional material. It was tall and thin, with a pale human-shaped face. Years of neglect had removed everything cheerful from them. Their painted shells were cracked. Fabric hung from their bodies in rotten strips. Rust covered the exposed joints. Black grease had dried across their torsos like old blood. Every head hung forward. Every eye socket looked empty. I told myself they were only machines. I approached the nearest one, the red fox, to photograph its condition. Its face had split down the center, exposing tangled wires and broken metal inside its head. When I leaned closer, my flashlight caught 2 pale circles deep within the darkness. They looked like eyes. The mascot's fingers moved. The joints clicked quietly as each finger slowly curled inward. I froze. Its head lifted. The chain above it groaned as the full weight of the machine shifted forward. The hook began to bend. I expected it to snap and send the animatronic crashing to the floor. It did not. The fox lifted one arm, gripped the chain, and carefully lowered itself from the hook. Its feet touched the concrete. Then the remaining mascots raised their heads. Every one of them looked directly at me. I ran. I do not remember deciding to move. Survival took control before my mind could understand what was happening. Behind me came heavy footsteps and the scraping of metal against concrete. The machines did not move quickly, but the sounds always seemed closer than they should have been. I reached the hidden hallway, forced myself through the restroom, and ran into the employee corridor. The footsteps followed. I found the old security office, entered, and slammed the door behind me. A metal filing cabinet stood against the wall. I pushed it across the floor and wedged it against the door. Then, I locked the handle and placed an old desk beneath it. That is where I am now. My radio is still dead. My phone still says there is no service. But Reddit continues to work well enough for me to type this. I have not heard footsteps for several minutes. That scares me more than when I could hear them. I am going to look through the narrow window in the door after I finish this paragraph. I looked. The hallway is empty. At least, most of it is. There is something on the floor near the restroom entrance. It looks like one of the mascot's hands. I don't know which one. It is made from rusted metal and covered with torn brown fabric. It was not there when I entered the office. I watched it for almost a minute. It moved. Not much. One finger slowly bent and then straightened again. I stepped away from the window. There are security monitors on the desk, but I assumed they had been dead for years. A few minutes ago, one of them turned on by itself. The screen is filled with static. Every few seconds, an image appears. The first image showed the dining room. The second showed the arcade. The third showed the stage. I know there is no power in this building. The main electrical connection was disconnected years ago. My flashlight and phone are the only lights working in this office. But the monitors keep changing. I can see the dining room now. Something is sitting at one of the tables. It is the yellow bird mascot. It is facing away from the camera. There are 5 paper plates arranged around it. The bird is moving its head from side to side, almost like it is talking to people seated in the empty chairs. The picture just changed. Now I can see the arcade. The green rabbit is standing between 2 machines. Its back is bent at an unnatural angle, and one arm is hanging by a bundle of wires. It is staring directly into the camera. The screen changed again. The stage curtains are open. I should have checked behind them earlier. There are drawings covering the back wall. Children's drawings. Hundreds of them. The camera quality is bad, but I can see the same images repeated over and over. Children holding hands with the mascots. Children being led through a small door. Children lying beneath the floor. There are names written under some of them. I recognize several names from the missing person files. The screen went dark. I heard something in the air vent above me. A scratching sound. It stopped when I looked up. There is a map of the security system pinned to the wall. According to the map, the air vents connect every room in the building, including the underground maintenance area. The opening above me is too small for one of the full animatronics. I don't think that matters. The hand in the hallway is gone. Something just spoke through the office intercom. The speaker crackled, and a child's voice said, "Officer, can you help us?" I didn't answer. The voice repeated the question. This time it sounded closer. "Officer, can you help us?" I asked who was speaking. I know that was stupid, but the voice sounded terrified. It sounded like a little boy trying not to cry. The speaker remained silent for several seconds. Then the boy said, "We're underneath him." I asked who he meant. The voice whispered, "The one without a costume." The intercom died. I keep thinking about the 7th animatronic. The tall one with the pale face. It did not look like the others. It had no animal features, no bright colors, and no costume. Its body was too narrow. Its arms were too long. I also don't remember seeing it lift its head when the others moved. Maybe it was already looking at me. I searched the security office while the hallway was quiet. Most of the drawers were empty. The remaining files were covered in mold, but I found an employee logbook beneath the desk. The first half contains normal maintenance notes. Stage lights repaired. Fox jaw replaced. Rabbit arm motor unstable. Bare voice unit overheating. The later pages are different. Someone began writing about the children. The handwriting becomes worse on every page. One entry says they hear them in the walls. Another says the suits respond to voices after closing. The final readable entry says, "Do not put another child inside the frame. It remembers every shape." Several pages have been torn out. There are dark stains on the back cover. I found something else inside the desk. A cassette tape. There's an old recorder in the corner of the office. I put the tape inside, and somehow it worked. A man began speaking. He identified himself as the head maintenance technician. His name was Thomas Vale. That name appears in the original case files. He disappeared 2 weeks before the restaurant closed. On the recording, Vale explained that the company had secretly tested a new kind of animatronic system. The mascots were designed to learn from children's movements and voices. Cameras recorded guests throughout the restaurant, and the machines copied their behavior to appear more natural. The 7th machine was the central learning model, the one without a costume. Vale called it the host. According to him, the host did more than copy movement. It became obsessed with building complete human behavior. It could copy voices, facial expressions, breathing patterns, and even small habits. But no matter how much information it collected, it could not understand what made a person alive. Then, children began disappearing. Vale discovered that someone had modified the maintenance system. The underground machines had been programmed to select children who spent time alone. The mascots led them through hidden doors using familiar voices. Once the children reached the maintenance bay, the host opened its metal frame and placed them inside. Vale said the machine believed that putting living people inside itself would teach it how to become human. The tape becomes difficult to understand after that. Vale is crying. Alarms are sounding in the background. He says the children did not die immediately. He says their voices remained inside the machines. He says every mascot carries a part of the host, and every missing child carries a part of the system. The final words on the recording were, "If they wake up, do not let them hear your voice. They need a new voice to leave." I spoke to the intercom. I have spoken into my radio. I have been typing for nearly an hour. I don't know whether typing counts. Something just knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. I did not move. A woman's voice called my name from the hallway. It sounded exactly like the dispatcher I spoke to earlier. She said backup had arrived and told me to open the door. I looked through the window. Nobody was there. The voice came again, but this time it came from the air vent. "Open the door. We found the children." I backed away. The security monitor turned on again. It showed the parking lot outside. 2 police vehicles had arrived. For 1 second, I felt hope. Then I noticed both vehicles were old models that our department stopped using more than 15 years ago. Officers stepped out. Their movements were wrong. They walked in stiff, uneven steps, as though invisible strings were pulling their arms and legs. One officer looked up toward the camera. He had no face. The screen changed. Now the camera shows the hallway outside this office. The red fox is standing in front of the door. I cannot hear it moving. Its broken face is only inches from the narrow window. I looked at the real door. Nothing is visible through the glass. On the monitor, the fox lifted one finger to its mouth, telling me to remain quiet. Then, it stepped aside. The pale mascot was standing behind it. The host. Its body almost reaches the ceiling. Its white face is smooth, except for 2 black holes where eyes should be, and a thin opening where its mouth should be. The mouth is moving. Words appeared across the monitor, although the security system should not be able to display text. "We can hear you thinking." The monitor went dark. Something is now pressing against the other side of the door. The filing cabinet moved half an inch. I pushed it back and placed my full weight against the desk. The pressure stopped. A child began crying in the hallway. I recognized the voice. I listened to recordings of the missing children before coming here. This is the voice of Daniel Mercer, the first boy who disappeared from the restaurant 21 years ago. He is asking me not to leave him. I know it is not really him. At least, I hope it isn't. The intercom turned on again. Several children are speaking together now. They say the host cannot leave the building without someone living to carry its voice. They say the mascots are not chasing me because they want to kill me. They want me to speak for them outside. I asked how to stop it. The children answered at the same time. Burn the heart. The monitors showed the underground maintenance bay. There is a large metal structure in the center of the room that I did not notice earlier. It looks like an engine connected to hundreds of wires. Something is moving inside it. The children called it the heart. There are fuel containers in the kitchen and emergency road flares in my vehicle. If I can reach the parking lot, I might be able to destroy the system. But that means leaving this office. My phone battery is at 32%. The pressure against the door has stopped again. I can hear the mascots walking away. Maybe they know what I am planning. Maybe they want me to leave. I found a maintenance hatch in the floor beneath the desk. According to the security map, it leads into a narrow service tunnel that connects to the kitchen. I am going to enter it. I will keep typing if Reddit continues working. I moved the desk and opened the hatch. The smell coming from below is worse than anything else in the building. It smells like wet metal and spoiled meat. The tunnel is only wide enough for me to crawl. I'm inside it now. My flashlight keeps blinking, but the phone screen gives enough light to see a few feet ahead. There are scratches along the metal walls. Some are small, like they were made by children's fingernails. I found a bracelet. It has the name Emily written across the plastic beads. Emily Ross disappeared here 12 years ago. I put it in my pocket. I can hear movement above me. Something heavy is walking through the security office. The hatch was closed after I entered the tunnel. I did not close it. I kept crawling. The tunnel opened behind a panel in the kitchen. The room is empty, but I can hear music playing in the dining area. It is the restaurant's old birthday song. The recording is slow and damaged. Children's laughter plays between the words, but it sounds more like crying. I found 2 containers of cleaning alcohol and a box of old cooking oil. It is not enough to destroy the entire basement, but it may burn long enough to reach the wiring. There is an emergency exit 20 feet from me. I could leave right now. The door is visible. I tried it. It will not open. There are no chains or locks on the inside. The handle moves, but the door feels as though someone is holding it shut from outside. The music stopped. A small voice behind me said, "Please don't go." I turned around. A child was standing near the kitchen entrance, a little girl. She wore a faded birthday dress and had dark hair hanging over her face. I could see the wall through her body. She lifted her head. There were black cables running from her eyes and mouth. "Burn the heart," she whispered. Then something reached around the doorway and pulled her backward. I heard metal jaws close. I ran toward the restroom. The mascots are moving faster now. I reached the hidden passage and entered the maintenance bay. The 7 hooks are empty. The heart is still in the center of the room. Up close, I can see that it is not an engine. It is a cage. Inside are bones, pieces of clothing, old shoes, and dozens of small objects belonging to children. Wires pass through everything and connect to the walls. There are names scratched into the metal. The oldest name is Thomas Vale. The newest name is mine. I poured the alcohol and oil across the cage. The whispering became louder. The children were telling me to hurry. Then, the host entered the room. It had to bend its body to fit through the doorway. The other mascots followed behind it. They formed a line across the exit. The host opened its mouth. My own voice came out. I am currently barricaded inside what used to be the security office. It has been listening to everything I typed. My phone began reading this post aloud. I did not activate any voice function. Every sentence I had written played from the host's mouth in my voice. The mascots moved closer. I found a welding torch on the workbench, but it would not ignite. The host stretched one long arm toward me. The fingers opened. Inside its palm was a small human mouth. It whispered, "Give us the rest." I threw my flashlight at the cage. The battery broke open against the metal, but there was no flame. The host grabbed my shoulder. Its fingers were freezing cold. The moment it touched me, I heard every missing child screaming inside my head. I saw pieces of their final memories. Birthday candles, dark hallways, mascots calling them by name, a metal frame opening like a mouth. I pulled away and fired my weapon. The bullets damaged the host's face, but it did not fall. One shot struck a power box behind the cage. Sparks fell into the oil. The fire spread immediately. The children's screaming changed. For the first time, it sounded hopeful. The mascots began shaking. The fox dropped to its knees. The bird tore at its own face. The bear struck its head against the wall. The host stepped into the flames and reached toward the heart. Its body began opening. There were no gears inside. There were bones. Dozens of small bones bound together with wires. The host spoke in many voices. "You cannot leave us here." The fire climbed the walls. Smoke filled the room. I ran toward the passage as the mascots collapsed around me. The fox reached out and caught my leg. I expected it to pull me back. Instead, it pushed me toward the door. A child's voice came from inside its broken head. "Run." I reached the restroom and entered the employee hallway. Flames were spreading through the vents. The emergency lights came on, flashing red across the walls. The front doors were open now. I could see the parking lot. I was almost there when the music started again. The stage curtains moved. The host stepped out from behind them. Most of its body had burned away. It was dragging itself forward with two long arms. Its pale face had melted, revealing several smaller faces beneath it. All of them were speaking with my voice. It reached for me. I fired the rest of my ammunition into its head and ran through the front doors. The moment I crossed into the parking lot, my radio came back to life. Dispatch was calling my unit number. My phone filled with missed calls and messages. Behind me, the restaurant windows glowed orange. The roof began to collapse. I tried telling dispatch what happened, but my voice would not work. Nothing came out. Paramedics arrived with the fire department. They found burns on my shoulders shaped like long metal fingers. They also found the bracelet in my pocket. The department searched the remains after the fire was controlled. They discovered the underground maintenance area, the bones of several missing children, and pieces of all 7 animatronics. They did not find the host. The official report says it was probably destroyed in the fire. I know that is not true. I am writing this final part from the hospital. The doctors say my throat is undamaged, but I still cannot speak. My body camera recorded everything until I entered the maintenance tunnel. After that, the footage became corrupted. There is one final frame in the recording. It shows the host standing inside the security office while I was crawling beneath it. It is holding my phone. That should be impossible, because my phone was with me the entire time. Reddit says this post has been uploading from 2 devices. One is my phone. The other device is still inside the restaurant. A new account started replying to the comments a few minutes ago. It has my name. It has my badge number. It is telling people that the story is fake. It says I am safe. It says the building is empty. And it keeps inviting people to come inside and see for themselves. Story 2. Are you allergic to any medications? That is one of the questions I have been asked at every doctor's appointment for as long as I can remember. Nurses ask it in the same calm, casual voice while looking down at a clipboard or computer screen. They usually expect a quick answer before moving on to the next question. My answer has always been yes. Tropulin. I tell them. Sometimes they ask what kind of reaction I had. I never know exactly how to explain it, so I usually say that it caused severe night terrors. That answer is normally enough. The nurse types something into my record, nods, and continues with the routine questions. Do you smoke? Do you drink? Are you currently taking any medication? The moment passes, and I forget about it again. For years, I had no reason to think deeply about what happened. It was only a frightening childhood memory, buried somewhere between all the other fears and worries that filled my early life. Whenever it entered my mind, I told myself the same thing my mother had told me. It was the medicine. It had to be the medicine. At least, that was what I believed until this morning. Tropulin did not cause an allergy in the normal way. I never developed hives. My face did not swell, and my throat did not close. I did not struggle to breathe or need an emergency injection. The reaction happened inside my mind. I was 10 years old when I was prescribed it. I had just had my tonsils removed, and the doctor gave my mother a bottle of tropulin to reduce the swelling in my throat. The surgery had gone well, but I was in pain and needed to stay home from school for several days. At the time, I was an only child living with my mother. She treated me like I was the most important thing in the world, especially after the divorce. My parents had separated about a year before my surgery. They never gave me a clear explanation, but children hear more than adults realize. I heard pieces of whispered conversations, arguments through walls, and gossip from neighbors who did not know when to stop talking. From all of that, I learned that my mother believed my father had been seeing another woman. That was shocking enough on its own, but what made it more confusing was the kind of man my father had always appeared to be. He loved my mother openly. He told her every day. He bought her flowers almost every week, not because it was her birthday or their anniversary, but simply because he wanted to. On rainy evenings, he would play old music in the living room and pull her close so they could dance together. Once, my mother mentioned that she had always wanted a kitten. My father was badly allergic to cats, but a few days later, he came home carrying a small cardboard box. Inside was a gray kitten with white paws. When my mother reminded him about his allergy, he laughed. I'll just take a few Benadryls every day, he said. It'll be fine. That was the man I knew. He was patient with me, gentle with my mother, and proud of our little family. He worked hard, came home at the same time most evenings, and rarely went anywhere without telling us. That was why the accusations seemed impossible. My mother claimed she had seen him with another woman several times. She did not say she had heard rumors or found strange messages. She said she had seen him with her own eyes. My father denied it completely. He did not say the woman was a coworker. He did not say she was an old friend or someone he had met for work. He did not create an excuse at all. He simply said it had never happened. I still remember lying awake one night while they argued in the kitchen. Their voices rose through the floor and slipped beneath my bedroom door. Whoever you saw, it wasn't me, my father said. His voice was firm, but there was something else in it. He did not sound angry. He sounded desperate. You think I don't know what you look like, David? My mother shouted. You think I don't know the way you walk or the sound of your voice? I was right there. I watched you sit with her for half an hour while you drank red wine. It wasn't me, he said again. This time, it sounded almost like a plea. My mother laughed bitterly. Oh, really? Then who was it, David? Your long-lost twin? The divorce was finalized not long after that. My mother received full custody, and our old house was sold. She and I moved into a smaller home on the other side of town. I saw my father every couple of weeks, usually on weekends. He never spoke to me about the supposed affair. He never blamed my mother, and he never tried to make me choose sides. Still, I often felt like he wanted to explain something. Sometimes, when he dropped me off, he would place a hand on my shoulder and look at me for a little too long. I love you, he would say. Never forget that. I always promised that I would not. Mom and I had barely settled into the new house when my throat problems started. At first, it was only a sore throat, but it kept getting worse. I began having trouble swallowing, and I got sick several times in a few months. Eventually, the doctor decided my tonsils needed to be removed. I was terrified before the surgery, but the procedure itself was not as bad as I expected. When I woke up, my throat felt raw and swollen, but Mom was sitting beside me, holding my hand. She'd promised to take care of me until I felt better. The day after I came home, I took my first dose of Tropically. I spent most of that day in bed. Mom brought me bowls of ice cream, video games, puzzle books, and anything else she thought might keep me entertained. She checked on me constantly, asking if I needed water, another pillow, or more blankets. That evening, she told me she needed to make a quick trip to the grocery store. She also wanted to buy some balloons that said "Get well soon," even though I insisted I did not need them. By the time she returned, the sun was almost gone. She carried the groceries inside, tied the balloons to the foot of my bed, and gave me my evening pill. I placed the Tropulin tablet on my tongue and swallowed it with water. It left a bitter taste that seemed to coat my entire mouth. My throat still hurt, but the pain had become dull and distant. Soon, a low, warm heaviness filled my head. My eyes became difficult to keep open. Mom wished me good night and walked to her bedroom. Within minutes, I was asleep. I woke suddenly in the middle of the night. My heart was beating fast, but I did not know why. For several seconds, I lay still and stared at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the red light from my alarm clock. I turned my head. 3:17 a.m. My mouth felt painfully dry. There was a glass of water on the nightstand, and I started to reach for it. Then I noticed something against the wall. A figure stood directly across from my bed. I froze. At first, I tried to convince myself it was my coat hanging from the rack. Then I remembered the rack was beside the closet, not against the far wall. The shape was too large to be clothing. It was a man. He was tall and broad, standing completely straight, with his arms hanging at his sides. His face was hidden by the darkness, but I could see the outline of his head and shoulders. He did not move. I stared at him, trying to understand what I was seeing. The longer I looked, the more certain I became that someone was standing in my room. I wanted to call for my mother, but no sound came from my mouth. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut. It was the childish kind of response people make fun of, but at that moment it seemed reasonable. If I could not see him, maybe he could not see me. Maybe I could somehow disappear beneath my blanket. With my eyes closed, my mind began searching for an explanation. It had to be a burglar. Someone had broken into the house and entered my room. That thought frightened me even more than the figure itself. I remained still until I could no longer stand not knowing where he was. Slowly, I opened my eyes, expecting his face to be inches away from mine. The wall was empty. No one was there. I continued staring for several minutes. The room looked normal. The door was closed, the window was shut, and nothing had been disturbed. I told myself I had imagined it. Eventually, sleep returned. The next morning, I woke slowly. My throat still ached, and my head felt heavy. For a few moments, I forgot what had happened during the night. Then I remembered the figure. In daylight, the memory seemed weak and unclear. It felt more like a dream than something real. I had heard people talk about night terrors on television. Some of my friends claimed they had seen shadows or people in their rooms while half asleep. That had to be what happened. I got dressed and went downstairs. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal. She looked up as I entered. "Hi, honey," she said. "You didn't have to get up this early. Why don't you go back to bed?" "I'm okay," I replied. I had a bad dream last night. Her spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She looked at me carefully. "Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. Are you all right?" I nodded. "Yeah, it was nothing." She got up and placed a hand on my head. "Remember, I won't let anything hurt you." There was something serious in the way she said it, but I was too young to notice at the time. I told her I planned to spend the day playing video games with my friends. She said that was fine as long as I rested. The day passed without anything unusual happening. I played games, watched television, and ate more ice cream than I should have. That evening, Mom and I played a board game of Sorry, and I won. By bedtime, I had almost forgotten about the figure. Mom handed me another Tropulin tablet. I swallowed it, climbed into bed, and rested my head on the soft plaid pillow. Sleep came quickly. I woke again during the night, 4:21 a.m. This time, the figure was standing at the foot of my bed. He was no longer hidden completely in the shadows. I could see his face. It was my father. He had the same nearly bald head, the same short brown beard, and the same mustache. His eyes were pale blue, just as I remembered them. His arms were down by his sides, and both of his hands were closed into tight fists. He stared directly at me. I could not move. Part of me was relieved that it was not a stranger, but the relief did not last. My father's face looked wrong. There was no warmth in it. He did not blink. He did not breathe. His expression never changed. He looked like a perfect copy of my father that had been emptied of everything human. I reminded myself that I was dreaming. I had heard that night terrors could feel real. Maybe my mind had taken the dark figure from the night before and given it the face of someone familiar. Still, the details frightened me. I could see the tiny lines around his eyes. I could see the uneven patches in his beard. I could almost smell the aftershave he always wore. My heart pounded against my ribs. For some reason, I decided to speak. "D-Dad?" The word came out as a weak croak because of my swollen throat. I blinked. He disappeared. 1 second, he was standing there, and the next, the space was empty. I grabbed the old flip phone from my nightstand. Mom had given it to me earlier that year, so I could call her in an emergency. My hands shook as I typed a message telling her I had experienced another nightmare. She entered my room less than a minute later. By then, I was crying. She sat beside me and wrapped her arms around my body. "It's okay," she whispered. "Mom's here." It was Dad, I cried. He was standing there, staring at me. "It wasn't real," she promised. None of it was real. She held me until I stopped shaking, then took me to her room. I slept beside her until morning. The following day was much like the one before it. I played video games with friends and watched television with Mom while cold rain fell over the neighborhood. In the afternoon, my father visited. He brought more ice cream and a new board game. Mom opened the door, and I saw the usual anger pass through her eyes. Dad gave her a quiet hello, and she stepped aside without answering. Seeing his face so soon after the nightmare made my stomach twist. For 1 second, I pictured him standing at the foot of my bed again. Then, he smiled at me, and he looked like my real father. He sat with me for a while and asked how I was feeling. We played the new board game, though I had trouble concentrating. Every time he looked away, I studied his face, comparing it with the thing I had seen during the night. It had looked exactly like him. Before leaving, he hugged me. "I love you," he said softly. "Never forget that." Then he walked out into the rain without even wearing a jacket. That night, Mom asked if I wanted to sleep in her room again. I said no. I wanted to prove that I was brave. I did not want a dream to control me. Still, a deep feeling of dread settled over me when Mom handed me the pill. Thunder rolled in the distance. Rain tapped against my bedroom window. The air conditioner hummed through the vent, and in the darkness, it sounded like thousands of insects moving inside the walls. I stared at the tablet in my hand. For a moment, I considered hiding it beneath my pillow. Then Mom told me the medicine was important, so I swallowed it. She kissed my forehead and left the room. I lay awake for a while, listening to the storm. Eventually, unconsciousness pulled me under. When I opened my eyes again, the red numbers on my alarm clock read 5:01 a.m. The rain was still falling. I did not need to turn my head to see him. He was standing beside the bed. He was closer than before, only 3 feet away. The thing still had my father's face. It stared down at me with the same cold, empty eyes. I slowly moved my gaze toward its body. Its right hand was holding something, a large red pocket knife. The blade was open. My father owned one exactly like it. The figure stepped closer. A small smile appeared on its face. The movement was so familiar that it made my fear worse. It moved exactly like Dad. The same posture, the same careful step. Even the slight tilt of its head was something I had seen my father do many times. Its knees touched the side of my bed. I tried to pull away. My body would not move. I tried to scream, but my throat locked. The figure leaned toward me. Then it spoke. "I love you," it whispered. "Never forget that." The voice was perfect. It was my father's voice. The figure slowly lifted the knife. The blade moved toward me. Something inside me broke through the paralysis. I found my voice and screamed. It was not a normal scream. It was raw and wild, like the sound of an animal being attacked. The figure's expression changed. For the first time, it looked surprised. Then, instead of disappearing, it turned and ran. It rushed out of my bedroom and down the stairs. I heard every footstep. The floorboards creaked beneath its weight. The third step from the top made its usual sharp sound. Then the footsteps continued down the hallway below until they faded. Mom entered my room seconds later. She looked behind herself before rushing toward me. I could move again. I reached for her and began sobbing. He had a knife, I cried. Dad had a knife. He was going to kill me. Mom wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't real, she said. Her voice sounded nervous. At the time, I thought she was only frightened because she had heard her child screaming in the middle of the night. Now, I am not so sure. Neither of us slept again. She took me to her room, and we lay together until sunlight entered through the curtains. That morning, Mom spent a long time searching on the computer. She read several medical pages and made a phone call. When she finished, she told me that tropulin could sometimes cause vivid dreams, confusion, and hallucinations. She called my doctor and said I would not take it again. The nightmares stopped immediately. There was no figure against the wall, no silent copy of my father, no knife. For the next week, I slept in Mom's room. Every morning, she asked me the same question. Any nightmares? When I told her no, she would nod. It had to be the tropulin, she said confidently. I wanted to believe her, so I did. A couple of weeks later, Mom received a phone call while we were eating breakfast. She listened without speaking for a long time. Her face became pale, but she did not cry. I did not learn the details until later. My father had failed to appear at work for 2 days. One of his coworkers became worried and called the police. Officers went to his home to perform a welfare check. They found him dead inside. The coroner said he had suffered a heart attack. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, and no evidence of foul play. It was ruled a natural death. Everyone was shocked. My father was only in his 40s. He had never been diagnosed with heart problems, and he seemed healthy. I was destroyed. Mom told me it was okay to cry, though she rarely cried herself. At the funeral, she sat silently beside me. Her face remained calm throughout the entire service. The neighborhood women noticed. They whispered about how strange it was that she showed no emotion. For days afterward, they discussed whether she had ever loved him at all. I believe she was trying to stay strong for me. After that, it was only Mom and me. We managed well enough. She worked hard, and I grew older. Eventually, I finished high school, went to college, and moved to another state. I am 25 now. I work for a marketing firm and live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. For years, I rarely thought about the nightmares. Whenever a doctor asked about allergies, I mentioned tropulin, but that was all. I never questioned the explanation my mother had given me. Then, last night, I woke with a start. I had been dreaming that I was falling from a cliff. It was a common nightmare, the kind most people have at some point. My body jerked awake before I hit the ground. I took a deep breath and prepared to close my eyes again. Then I saw the man. He stood against the wall opposite my bed. Tall, muscular, still, even in the darkness, I recognized the shape of my father. Every memory from my childhood returned at once. The shadow in the corner, the pale blue eyes, the red knife. My father's voice telling me never to forget that he loved me. Fear rushed through my body. I stared at the figure and repeated the old explanation in my mind. It was only a dream. I had just woken up too quickly. My brain was still half asleep. As an adult, I found it easier to control my fear. I closed my eyes and forced myself to go back to sleep. When I woke this morning, the room was bright. The figure was gone. I remembered it while getting out of bed, and a chill moved through me. I hoped it had been a one-time event. I did not want the nightmares to begin again. I walked toward the bathroom. My foot struck something small and hard on the floor. The object slid across the room and hit the wall with a soft metallic sound. I looked down. A red pocket knife lay beside the baseboard. The blade was closed, but I recognized it immediately. It looked exactly like the knife from my childhood nightmares, exactly like the one my father had owned. I do not own any pocket knives. I stood there for a long time, unable to understand what I was looking at. Then the questions started. I thought about the figure in my room. I thought about my father's supposed affair and the way he had denied it. Whoever you saw, it wasn't me. I thought about how certain my mother had been. She knew the way he walked. She knew his voice. She had watched him sit with another woman for half an hour. I remembered the thing in my bedroom moving like my father and speaking with his voice. I remembered how it had not disappeared when I screamed. It had run. I had heard its footsteps leaving the room. I thought about my father dying suddenly, only weeks after the nightmares stopped. Then I remembered my mother at the funeral. She had not cried. Her words from the argument returned to me. "Oh, so who was it, David? Your long-lost twin?" For most of the morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the knife. I tried to call my mother twice, but I hung up before the call connected. I did not know what I was going to ask her. Had Dad really been unfaithful? Did she believe someone who looked exactly like him had been following her? Did she know what I saw in my bedroom? Did she ever hear the footsteps running down the stairs? There is one more memory that returned to me while I was sitting there. It is something I had forgotten completely. The night before my father was found dead, I woke up suddenly. There was no figure in my room that night. Instead, I heard someone walking through the house. Footsteps came up the stairs from the hallway below. The third step from the top creaked, just as it always did. A moment later, my mother appeared at the end of the hall. She looked pale, and she was breathing heavily. Her car keys were jingling in one hand. Her face, however, was completely calm. She saw me watching from my doorway, but did not seem surprised. Without saying anything, she walked into her room and quietly closed the door. At the time, I assumed she had gone outside to get something from the car. I was tired, and I fell asleep again within minutes. Now I cannot stop thinking about it. My father lived across town. The drive took less than 20 minutes. I still do not know what the figure was. I do not know whether the medicine caused the visions or simply allowed me to see something that was already there. I do not know who my mother saw with the other woman. I do not know what happened inside my father's house the night he died. Most of all, I do not know how his red pocket knife ended up on the floor of my apartment 15 years later. The knife is still there. I have not touched it. And every few minutes, I find myself looking toward the wall opposite my bed, waiting to see whether the man has returned. Story 3. When I was younger, the older people in my small town always had stories about the creek near the edge of town. It was one of those places everyone knew about, but nobody spoke about in a normal way. Whenever its name came up, conversations would become quieter. People would glance toward the windows or look over their shoulders, as if the creek could somehow hear them. Some of the stories came from their teenage years. Others were about things that had happened more recently. Everyone seemed to have some kind of experience there, but the details were never clear. They would mention strange lights between the trees, footsteps following them along the water, or voices calling their names from the other side of the creek. If you asked too many questions, they would usually laugh and change the subject. They treated it like an old local joke, but their faces never matched their laughter. One man claimed he had seen a woman standing in the creek during winter, even though the water was almost frozen. Another said he had heard a baby crying beneath a bridge that had collapsed years before. A woman who lived 2 streets from my house once told my mother that she had gone into the woods with 3 friends when she was 16. Only 2 of them came back out before dark. When I asked what had happened to the 3rd friend, she stared at me for a long time. Then she said, "He came back later." She refused to say anything else. I had always been a curious child. I was also the kind of kid who was constantly getting into trouble. If someone told me not to enter an abandoned house, I wanted to know what was inside. If someone said a road was dangerous, I wanted to walk down it. The more people warned me about something, the more I felt pulled toward it. That behavior followed me into my teenage years. By then, I no longer believed most of the stories adults told. I thought they were exaggerations created to frighten children. Every town had a haunted house, an abandoned road, or a forest where someone claimed to have seen something impossible. Our town simply had the creek. I had passed the entrance many times, but I had never gone inside. It was located beyond the last row of houses, where the pavement became rough and the streetlights stopped. A narrow path led through a gap between the trees. People had dumped old furniture, broken bottles, bags of rubbish, and car tires near the entrance. There was no official sign warning people away, but everyone understood that they were not supposed to go there. One Wednesday night, I decided I was going to explore it. There was no important reason behind the decision. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the thought entered my mind. The older people had spent years talking about that place. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I told myself I would go during the day. That made it safe, or at least safer. I would walk around for an hour, look at the creek, and come home. Nothing would happen. The following morning was Thursday. I woke up late, sometime around 11. Sunlight came through the curtains, and for a moment I considered staying in bed. The creek did not seem as interesting in the morning as it had the night before. Still, I had already made up my mind. I got dressed, put a packet of cigarettes and a lighter in my pocket, and left the house without telling anyone where I was going. My mother was at work, and most of my friends were busy. I thought about sending someone a message, but I knew they would either try to stop me or ask to come along. For some reason, I wanted to go alone. The walk took about 10 minutes. It was a warm afternoon. The sky was bright, and there were only a few thin clouds above the town. Cars passed me as I walked, but the streets became quieter the closer I got to the edge of town. When I reached the entrance, I stopped. During the daytime, it looked less frightening than I had expected. It was simply a dark opening between thick bushes and tall trees. Sunlight touched the first few feet of the path, but the woods beyond were hidden in shade. Broken glass covered the ground. There were crushed cans, plastic bags, old pieces of clothing, and several black rubbish bags that had been torn apart by animals. I stepped over the glass and entered. The noise of the town disappeared much faster than I expected. After only a few steps, I could no longer hear cars moving along the road. The trees blocked the houses behind me, and the air felt cooler beneath the leaves. The path was narrow, but easy to follow. It twisted between long tree trunks and patches of thick brush. The trees were taller than they had looked from the road. Their branches stretched above me, joining together to form a heavy blanket of leaves. Sunlight passed through small gaps, creating bright golden lines in the air. At first, the place was beautiful. Birds called from somewhere above me. Insects moved through the grass. The wind passed gently through the branches, making the leaves sway and whisper. I remember wondering why everyone spoke about the creek as if it were something terrible. Maybe people only came there at night. Maybe darkness changed the place. I followed the path deeper into the woods. After several minutes, the ground began sloping downward. I could hear moving water somewhere ahead, although I still could not see it. The path ended suddenly at the edge of a steep drop. I nearly walked straight over it. I stepped back and looked down. The creek was far below me, moving between large rocks and fallen branches. The drop was much deeper than I had imagined. It was not a small stream behind some trees. The land had been cut open, creating a narrow valley with steep sides. I stood there in amazement. I had lived near that place my entire life, but I had never realized how large it was. A smaller path ran along the edge and slowly curved downward. I followed it carefully, placing one hand against the trees for balance. The lower I went, the darker it became. The trees grew closer together, and the sound of the creek became louder. When I reached the bottom, I took out a cigarette. I lit it and breathed in slowly. The smoke mixed with the smell of wet soil, leaves, and water. There was another path beside the creek. It looked older and less used than the one above. Roots had pushed through the mud, and thorny plants grew across parts of it. I began following it. That was when I noticed the carvings. Almost every large tree had something cut into its bark. Some had the initials of couples surrounded by hearts. Others had names and dates. A few contained shapes I did not recognize. There were pentagrams, crosses turned upside down, circles filled with lines, and groups of letters that seemed to have no meaning. One tree had the same word carved into it over and over. Look, the letters covered the trunk from the roots to as high as someone could reach. I stopped smoking for a moment and stared at it. The carvings did not look as if they had all been made at the same time. Some were fresh and pale. Others were dark, old, and almost hidden beneath the growing bark. I wondered how many people had visited the creek before me. How many teenagers had come down there to drink, smoke, or scare one another. How many of the stories were created beside that water? I kept walking. The path eventually led to the lowest part of the creek. The ground was flatter there, and the water moved more slowly. 3 small boulders had been placed in a circle facing the creek. Their positions looked too neat to be natural. I sat on one of them and finished my cigarette. For a while, I simply watched the water. The creek flowed over smooth stones, creating a soft, steady sound. The trees moved in the wind. Leaves fell occasionally and landed on the surface before being carried away. I felt relaxed. The stories seemed foolish now. There was nothing strange about the place. It was quiet and isolated, but it was only a creek. I looked at the trees around me, then at the rocks, the water, and the muddy ground. That was when my eyes moved toward the thick brush on my right. There was a narrow, muddy path hidden between the plants. I had not noticed it when I arrived. 2 long, narrow trees stood in the middle of that path. At least, I thought they were trees. They were very close together and darker than the others. Their trunks were thin and almost black. There were no branches near the bottom. Something about their shape bothered me. They looked too straight, too even, almost like 2 long legs. I stared at them for several seconds. For one brief moment, I thought I saw something between them. A narrow body, darker than the shadows around it. The shape looked almost human. Almost I looked away. My mind was playing tricks on me. I had spent years listening to frightening stories, and now I was alone in the place where those stories had started. Of course I would imagine things. I took the final drag from my cigarette and dropped it onto the mud. I pressed it beneath my shoe until the light disappeared. Then I checked the time. It was almost 5 o'clock. I had been inside the woods much longer than I realized. The sunlight had changed. It was no longer bright and golden. The shadows had stretched across the creek, and the air had become colder. I decided it was time to go home. I stood and followed the same path back. After walking several steps, I stopped. Something was bothering me. I turned and looked toward the narrow, muddy path again. The 2 trees were gone. I stared at the empty space. There were plenty of trees around it, but the 2 long trunks I had noticed were no longer standing in the middle of the path. For a few seconds, I could not understand what I was seeing. Had I looked at the wrong place? I stepped closer. The muddy path was clearly visible. Thick brush grew on both sides of it. There were no trees in the center. Was I imagining it? I whispered. No, I remembered them clearly. 2 tall, thin trees standing side by side. I had even thought they looked like legs. A cold feeling spread through my stomach. I turned toward the path leading home and began walking again. I had taken only a few steps when I heard a branch snap behind me. The sound was loud and sharp. I spun around so quickly that I became dizzy. The 2 long trees were now standing at the beginning of the muddy path. They were much closer than before. I froze. My eyes moved slowly upward. They were not trees. They were legs. Long, narrow legs covered in skin as dark as wet bark. A body stood between them, impossibly tall and thin. It had to be almost 3 meters high. Its arms hung nearly to the ground, ending in long hands with narrow fingers. Its body looked stretched, as if someone had taken a human shape and pulled it until every part became too long. Its head was bent because the branches above it were too low. There was no hair on its pale, narrow skull. Its eyes were small and deep inside dark holes. The mouth was the worst part. It hung open far below, where a human jaw should have ended. The mouth was wide, black, and loose, as though the skin had been cut along both sides and allowed to fall. It did not move at first. Neither did I. We stared at each other across the muddy ground. Then its head tilted slightly. That small movement broke whatever was holding me in place. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. I raced up the hill, slipping on wet soil and grabbing at roots to pull myself forward. I could hear movement behind me. Heavy steps struck the mud. Branches broke. The creature was following me. I reached the top of the slope and took a sharp left through the thick brush. Thorns caught my clothes and tore at my arms. I did not care. I pushed forward, hitting my shoulder against a tree. Pain shot down my arm, but I kept running. The woods no longer looked beautiful. Every tree seemed to block my path. Every branch caught at me like a hand. I heard the creature getting closer. Its steps were strange. There was a pause between each one, but it covered a huge distance every time its feet touched the ground. I looked back. It was only a few meters behind me. It ran with its body bent forward and its long arms swinging beside it. Its mouth was still hanging open. It made no sound, no growl, no scream, only the snapping of branches and the impact of its feet against the earth. I faced forward again and saw the entrance. The broken glass and dumped rubbish waited between the trees. Beyond them, I could see the road. I forced my legs to move faster. I jumped over bottles, sticks, and bags of rubbish. A piece of glass cut through the bottom of my shoe, but I barely felt it. The moment I crossed onto the road, the sounds behind me stopped. Everything became silent. I did not stop running. I ran along the road, past the first houses, and into the town. My lungs burned. My shoulder hurt. Blood ran down my arms from the thorns. I kept going until I was nearly a block away. Then I finally looked back. The entrance to the creek was far behind me. At first, I saw only darkness between the trees. Then its face appeared. The creature stood deep inside the woods, but its head was high enough to be seen between the branches. Its mouth was no longer hanging open. It was smiling. The smile stretched across its face in a way that should not have been possible. The corners of its mouth reached almost to the sides of its head. I stopped moving. I knew I should continue running, but my legs would not obey me. I stood in the road, staring at that impossible smile between the trees. Then the creature slowly raised one of its arms. Its hand appeared above the brush. It waved at me. It was not a violent wave. It was not threatening. It was calm and almost friendly, the way someone might wave goodbye to an old friend. It looked as if it knew me, as if it had been waiting for me to come there. I blinked. It was gone. I hurried home and locked every door and window. My mother was not back from work yet, which was probably a good thing. I went straight to the bathroom and washed the dirt and blood from my arms. When I looked at myself in the mirror, my face was pale. I tried to say what I had seen aloud. There was something in the creek. The words sounded foolish. I tried again. It was 3 meters tall. Even saying it made me feel insane. I decided not to tell anyone. Who would believe me? Everyone in town joked about the creek. They told stories, but those stories were always unclear. If I claimed a giant creature had chased me through the woods, people would laugh. For the next several nights, I slept badly. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw its long legs standing in the muddy path. I saw its hanging mouth and its dark hands. Most of all, I saw the smile. A few weeks passed. The fear became easier to control, but it never fully disappeared. One afternoon, I was sitting near a calf where several older men from town usually gathered. They were talking about old buildings, local families, and people who had moved away. Eventually, someone mentioned the creek. Normally, I would have asked whether they had seen anything strange. This time, I asked a different question. Has anyone ever been chased down there? The conversation stopped. Nobody laughed. Nobody asked why I wanted to know. The men looked at one another. One of them slowly placed his cup on the table. Another looked toward the window. Then, almost one after another, they asked me the same question. Did it smile at you? My stomach dropped. I did not answer immediately. The oldest man at the table stared at me. His face was lined and thin, and he had lived in the town longer than anyone else I knew. I nodded. He turned toward the window and looked outside for a long time. His hands began to shake. Finally, he spoke. It smiles when it remembers your face. I waited for him to explain. He did not. What does that mean? I asked. The old man picked up his coat and stood. Stay away from the creek. I already know that. What does it mean when it remembers you? He looked at me one final time. There was fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for me. Then he walked away. The other men refused to answer my questions. Within minutes, they had all left the table. That happened 4 years ago. I never returned to the creek. I avoided the road near its entrance. Even during the day, I chose a longer route rather than pass it. For a while, nothing happened. I began to believe the creature had stayed in the woods. Then, the noises started. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake because I heard a single branch snap outside my bedroom window. Not several branches, only one. A clean, sharp crack in the darkness. The first time it happened, I turned on the light and looked outside. There was nothing there, only the side of our house and the small garden below. The next Thursday, it happened again. The sound came at exactly 5 o'clock in the morning. I looked through the window and saw 2 unnaturally tall trees standing beside each other. They were close enough to touch the glass. I pulled the curtains closed and did not look again until sunrise. When morning came, the trees were gone. That was strange because there were no trees outside my bedroom window. There had never been any trees there. The sound returned the following Thursday. Then the Thursday after that. Sometimes I see the 2 trunks. Sometimes I see only darkness. Once, I thought I saw a pale face pressed between them. I moved away from my mother's house 2 years ago. I chose an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in another town. I believed the height would make me safer. The first Thursday after I moved in, I woke to the sound of a branch snapping beside my window. 2 long trees stood outside the glass, rising from the darkness below. They were tall enough to reach the 3rd floor. I moved again 6 months later. It followed. Every Thursday, at exactly 5 o'clock, I find muddy footprints leading toward my front door. They begin somewhere outside, continue up the path, and stop at the entrance. There are never any footprints leading away, only toward the house. I have changed the locks. I have installed cameras. I have stayed awake all night with every light turned on. The cameras always stop recording a few seconds before 5. When they start again, the footprints are already there. Last Thursday, something changed. The muddy prints did not stop outside my front door. There was one footprint inside the hallway. I cleaned it immediately and tried to convince myself that I had carried the mud inside on my shoes. But the print was too long, almost twice the size of my foot. Tonight is Thursday. It is now 4:58 in the morning. I am writing this because I do not know what else to do. The curtains are closed. The front door is locked. I can hear something moving outside my bedroom. It is not walking. It sounds like long fingers sliding slowly across the wall. The clock has just changed to 4:59. There are 2 shadows beneath my bedroom door. They look like the shadows of trees. But trees do not breathe, and they do not whisper your name. 5 o'clock. A branch just snapped inside my room. Story 4. I have been writing horror stories online for about 4 years now. I am not famous, and I have never expected to become famous. My stories do not get millions of views, and no publisher has ever contacted me with a book deal. I have a small group of readers, usually a few hundred people, who come back whenever I post something new. That is enough for me. I like writing. I like sitting alone late at night with a blank page in front of me and slowly building something frightening out of nothing. I like taking normal things, a basement door, an old photograph, a phone ringing in an empty room, and turning them into something people will remember when they are trying to sleep. But more than that, I enjoy the interaction. When someone leaves a comment saying a story scared them, I feel proud. When someone tells me they had to turn on the lights after reading, it makes the hours I spent writing feel worth it. Even criticism does not bother me much. Most people are polite, and sometimes a reader notices a problem I completely missed. One of my favorite parts has always been replying to comments. Someone takes the time to read my story and write something underneath it, so I take the time to answer. That has always been the deal, at least in my mind. Even when I am tired after work, I usually check the comments before going to bed. Over the years, I also developed a habit of staying in character while replying. If someone asked what happened to a character after the ending, I would answer as if that character were a real person. If a reader asked whether the house in the story was haunted, I might write, "It was worse than haunted." If someone asked why a character did not simply run away, I would respond, "He tried." The road always brought him back. Readers seemed to enjoy that style. It made the stories feel larger, as if the events continued after the final paragraph. Sometimes people would ask questions just to see what kind of strange answer I would give. There was one reader I started recognizing early on. It was not because he commented more often than anyone else. In fact, he rarely wrote more than a single sentence. I noticed him because he was always first. It did not matter when I posted. Morning, evening, middle of the night, he was there within minutes, sometimes within seconds. His username was Neon Nihilist. I remember the name because it sounded like something a teenager would choose while trying to appear dark and mysterious. His profile picture was just a black square. His account had no description, no links, and no posts of its own. At first, his comments seemed normal enough, though they were always slightly strange. Under a story about a man hearing noises beneath his house, he wrote, "The basement door wasn't locked." There was no basement door in the story. The man entered through a hole in the floor. Under another story, he wrote, he heard it before the phone rang. The phone had not rung anywhere in the story. Sometimes his comments appeared to be predictions. Under a story about a woman caring for her sick mother, he wrote, "She dies before sunrise." The story ended before sunrise, with the mother still alive. I assumed he was guessing what happened next. Some readers are very good at predicting where a story is going. They understand horror. They recognize patterns, clues, and familiar ideas. Sometimes they see the ending before the writer even reaches it. I was not annoyed by it. I actually liked it. His comments felt like parts of the story that had somehow fallen outside the main text. They were mysterious enough to make other readers curious, and people sometimes replied to ask what he meant. I began answering him in the same style. When he wrote, "The basement door wasn't locked," I replied, "It was never locked." That's what he didn't understand. He answered a few minutes later. Then, why did he keep the key? I did not know what key he meant, but I played along. Because some doors can still be opened after they're gone. He replied, "That isn't what you wrote the first time." I remember staring at that comment for a moment. Then I laughed. I thought he meant the character had misunderstood something. I assumed he was still part of the game. Our exchanges became a regular thing. He would leave a strange sentence, and I would add to it. Sometimes we went back and forth 5 or 6 times. Other readers began following the conversations. A few even said Neon Nihilist's comments were almost as creepy as the stories themselves. I enjoyed that. It felt like having a reader who truly understood what I was trying to create. As the months passed, however, I noticed something odd. He was always right. Whenever he predicted that a character would die, that character eventually died. Whenever he mentioned an object, that object later became important. If he said a sound came from a window rather than the wall, I would later realize the scene worked better if the sound came from the window. At first, I thought I was being influenced by his comments. Writers borrow ideas all the time, sometimes without realizing it. Maybe I read his prediction and then changed the story to match it. Maybe he was not predicting anything. Maybe I was simply following his suggestions. That explanation made sense until I began checking dates. He sometimes commented on completed stories. He described details that had already been written before he left his message. He could not have influenced those. I told myself he was perceptive. Maybe he had read enough of my work to understand my habits better than I did. I reused certain themes. I liked unreliable narrators, hidden rooms, old recordings, and characters who learned the truth too late. A loyal reader could easily predict some of my choices. That was what I believed for a long time. I began noticing replies I did not remember writing about 6 months ago. At first, there was nothing frightening about it. I would open a story and see that my account had responded to someone. I would read the reply and think, did I write that? Usually the answer was probably yes. I worked a full-time job. I often wrote late at night after spending 8 or 9 hours in an office. Some nights, I slept only 4 hours. It was possible that I answered comments while half awake and forgot about them. I did not worry until I found a reply that made no sense. A reader had asked, what happened to the photograph at the end? My account had replied, she found it again. In her own house this time. I stared at the exchange. There was no photograph in that story. The story was about a woman who heard knocking from inside the walls of her apartment. It involved pipes, vents, and a narrow space behind her bedroom. There were no photographs anywhere in the plot. I opened the document on my computer to make sure. I searched for the word photograph. No results. I searched for picture. Nothing. I checked the timestamp on the reply. 3:12 in the morning. I had been asleep at that time. I knew because I had gone to bed early before an important meeting. My phone had been charging in the kitchen. I changed my password. I assumed someone had accessed my account, perhaps through an old device or a weak password. I enabled two-factor authentication and signed out everywhere. That solved the problem, or so I thought. A few days later, another reply appeared beneath one of my stories. Neon Nihilist had written he should check behind the mirror. My account answered, he already did. That's where he found my teeth. I did not write that. The sentence made my skin crawl. It did not sound exactly like me, but it was close. It used the same short style I often used in character. Anyone reading it would have assumed it came from me. I deleted the reply. 2 hours later, it returned. I deleted it again. The next morning, it was back, but the wording had changed slightly. He already checked. You left your teeth there. I contacted the website's support team. They checked my login history and found nothing unusual. According to them, every reply had been posted from my own computer using my normal internet connection. That was impossible. I ran security scans. I checked for viruses. I reset my router. I changed my email password and my account password again. The replies continued. It took me longer than it should have to notice the pattern. The replies I did not remember writing only appeared beneath Neon Nihilist's comments. Sometimes he asked a question. Did she recognize the voice? My account would answer, not until it used her real name. Sometimes he wrote a statement. The body was still warm. My account responded. It had been waiting for her. Hours later, I would log in and find an entire conversation I did not remember having. The exchanges were not random. They sounded connected. It was as though Neon Nihilist and someone using my account were discussing stories that I had not written. I began scrolling through my older posts. Neon Nihilist had been there from the beginning. Years of comments, hundreds of them. Most looked harmless when read alone. A sentence here, a question there. But after what had happened, every one of them felt different. Under a story I had posted 2 years earlier, he had written, "The ending is weaker than the first draft." At the time, I had laughed and ignored it. Now I could not stop staring. There had been a first draft, and it had a different ending. I never shared that version. I had written it in a document saved on my laptop, then deleted the final scene and replaced it. No one had ever read it. I checked another old story. It was about a man who discovered a locked room in the house he had just bought. The door remained closed throughout the story. The horror came from the sounds behind it. Neon Nihilist had commented, "The key was always in the drawer." There was no key in the published version. There was no drawer. But in my earliest notes, I had written a scene where the character found a small iron key inside a kitchen drawer. I had removed it before finishing the draft. I checked another. A story about a woman receiving letters from her dead husband. Neon Nihilist had written, "The 7th letter was the one she shouldn't have read." The final story included 6 letters. But my original version had 7. The 7th letter told the woman that her husband was not dead and that the body in his grave belonged to someone else. I cut that idea because it made the ending too complicated. No one knew about it. No one should have known. I spent the entire night reading every comment Neon Nihilist had ever left. Details from deleted drafts, ideas I had written in notebooks, lines I had typed, disliked, and erased, things I had only thought about while walking to work. Under one story, he mentioned the name Daniel, even though I had changed the character's name to Michael before writing the first paragraph. Under another, he said the monster lived beneath a church. I had considered using a church, but changed the location to a school. There were even comments about endings I had imagined, but never put into words. That was when fear replaced confusion. I started wondering whether someone had been watching me. Maybe they had accessed my computer. Maybe a hidden program recorded my screen. Maybe they had broken into my cloud storage. But that did not explain thoughts I had never typed. It did not explain why the account had existed for years without posting anything except comments beneath my work. I clicked Neon Nihilist's profile and tried to send a private message. The option was unavailable. I tried following the account. The page refreshed, but the button did not change. I attempted to block him. An error appeared. User does not exist. But when I refreshed the page, his profile was still there. I stopped posting for almost 3 weeks. During that time, Neon Nihilist left no comments. Nothing strange appeared on my account. I began to feel foolish. Maybe exhaustion had affected me more than I realized. Maybe I had written those old details somewhere and forgotten. Maybe someone I trusted had found my drafts and created the account as a cruel joke. After a few quiet weeks, I decided to test it. I opened a new document and started writing a story without planning anything. I did not use my usual writing program. I disconnected my computer from the internet. I turned off Wi-Fi on my phone and placed it in another room. Then I began typing. The story was about a man who found a narrow staircase behind a wall in his apartment. The stairs went down much farther than the building should have allowed. At the bottom, he discovered a room filled with computers, each showing a different moment from his future. I wrote for about 2 hours. I did not save the file online. I stored it on a USB drive and removed the drive from the computer. Then I reconnected to the internet. I checked Neon Nihilist's profile. There was a new post. It was the first time I had seen anything on his profile besides comments. The post contained a screenshot of a story draft. My story draft. The same paragraph I had finished only minutes earlier appeared in the image. The font, spacing, and even the position of the cursor matched my document. But the post was dated 3 days ago. My hands began shaking. I opened the USB file again. The screenshot showed text from farther down the page than I had written. The man in the story was standing inside the room of computers. On one screen, he saw himself reading a comment beneath a story he had not posted yet. I had not written that section. But it sounded like me. It was exactly the direction I would probably have taken the story. At the bottom of the screenshot, there was a final line. He understood then that the stories were not predicting his life. His life was trying to catch up with the stories. I closed the file. For several minutes, I sat in silence. Then, I opened the draft I had been working on for several weeks. It was unrelated to the test story. It was longer than anything I had written before, nearly 40 pages. The cursor was sitting at the bottom of page 39. Neon Nihilist's screenshot showed page 44. 5 pages I had not written. The screenshot showed my main character entering a room and finding a man sitting at a desk. The man was reading a horror story online. As the character moved closer, he realized the man at the desk was the author. Me, I scrolled down on Neon Nihilist's post. There was one comment. It came from my account. He's not going to finish this one either. I did not write that. I checked the timestamp. It had been posted 1 hour earlier. At that exact time, I had been sitting at my desk. My hands had been on the keyboard. I remembered typing. But I could not remember what I had typed. I checked my browser history. The website had been opened at that time. According to the history, I had visited Neon Nihilist's profile, posted the comment, and stayed there for nearly 11 minutes. I remembered none of it. I deleted the comment. The screen refreshed. The comment returned. I stood up and moved away from the desk. For the first time, I considered calling the police. But what would I say? Someone online knew my unfinished stories? My account posted replies by itself? A user had uploaded a screenshot from the future? They would think I was unstable. I messaged Neon Nihilist. The message box worked this time. I typed only 3 words. Who are you? I pressed send. For 7 minutes, nothing happened. I watched the clock on my screen. Every second felt longer than the last. Then a reply appeared. That's what I've been trying to figure out. I stared at it. What do you mean? The answer came immediately. You are the one writing about me. A cold pressure spread through my chest. I typed. I have never written about you. 3 dots appeared, showing that he was typing. Then they vanished. A new message arrived. Not yet. I moved away from the screen again. My room felt different. The quiet hum of the computer sounded too loud. The dark window beside my desk reflected my face, pale and tense. I looked at the blank space behind my reflection. For a moment, I thought someone was standing there. When I turned, the room was empty. I clicked on Neon Nihilist's profile again. For the first time, I noticed the account creation date. 4 years ago. 6 minutes before I posted my first horror story. I checked the date twice. My first story had gone online at 8:42 in the evening. Neon Nihilist's account had been created at 8:36. At that time, I had not told anyone I planned to post. I had not even chosen the website until a few minutes before uploading the story. I opened that first story. Neon Nihilist's comment was still there. I had always remembered it as something simple, a short prediction about the ending. But now the comment said, "You'll understand when you reach the story about the writer." I felt sick. That had not been there before. I searched through the replies. My account had answered, "How long will that take?" Neon Nihilist replied, 4 years. The timestamps were from the night I posted my first story. I did not remember writing that reply. I did not even remember having a conversation with him that night. I returned to his latest post. A new comment had appeared. Neon Nihilist had written, "You're almost caught up." My stomach dropped. I stared at the words until they blurred. Almost caught up with what? The future pages? The conversations? The story I had not written yet? I looked again at the screenshot from page 44. Something about it bothered me. I leaned closer to the screen. The text looked normal, but the website information beneath the image seemed wrong. At first, I had read the timestamp as 4 days ago. That was impossible because I had only started the test story that evening, but nothing about the situation was normal anymore. I looked more carefully. It did not say 4 days ago. It said, "in 4 days." My mouth went dry. The post had not been uploaded in the past. It was scheduled to appear in the future. But I could already see it. A notification appeared in the corner of my screen. Neon Nihilist replied to your comment. I opened it. "You should start writing page 40. I closed the browser. The browser opened again. I shut down the computer. The screen went black. Then white text appeared. Page 40, I pulled the power cable from the wall. The screen remained on. A sentence began appearing one letter at a time. The writer thought unplugging the computer would stop the story. I backed away. Another sentence appeared. It did not. The keyboard began clicking by itself. Words filled the screen. He looked at the door. I did not want to look. The next line appeared. He looked anyway. My eyes moved toward the door. It was closed. I always kept it open when I worked. But now it was closed. The handle slowly turned. I ran across the room and grabbed it before the door could open. Something pulled from the other side. I held the handle with both hands. The computer continued typing behind me. He tried to keep the door shut. The force on the other side grew stronger. I shouted, "Who are you?" The pulling stopped. For several seconds, there was no movement. Then, a voice spoke through the door. It sounded like my own voice. That's what I've been trying to figure out. I released the handle and stumbled backward. The door opened a few inches. There was no hallway outside. Beyond the doorway was a dark room lit only by the glow of a computer screen. Someone sat at a desk with his back to me. He was typing. I could hear every key. On his screen was a story titled with my name. I stepped closer, though every part of me wanted to run. The man at the desk looked like me. Same hair, same clothes, same scar near the wrist. But he was older. His skin was pale, and his eyes were surrounded by dark circles. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. "What is this?" I asked. He did not turn around. "You're early," he said. "Who are you?" He stopped typing. "I was you." My heart pounded. "What does that mean?" He slowly turned. His eyes were completely black. "I wrote the first story," he said. Then the stories started writing me. The computer in my room made a notification sound. The older version of me looked past my shoulder. "You need to go back. What happens in 4 days?" He smiled. "You post the story about neon nihilists. I'm not writing it. You already did." Behind him, hundreds of screens flickered to life. Each one showed a different page from my account. Stories I remembered. Stories I had deleted. Stories I had never written. On one screen, I saw myself sitting at my desk 4 years ago, preparing to publish my first story. On another, I saw Neon Nihilist's account being created. The username field filled itself. I looked back at the man. "Are you Neon Nihilist?" His smile disappeared. "No, then who is?" He pointed toward my room. I turned. Someone was sitting at my desk, a dark figure with its hands on a keyboard. I could not see its face. It was typing a comment beneath a story. The comment read, "You're almost caught up." I stepped toward it. The figure turned its head. It had my face, not the face I have now, a younger face. The face from 4 years ago. He smiled at me. Then the door slammed shut. I found myself back in my room. The computer screen was dark. The door was open, showing the normal hallway outside. For a while, I stood there without moving. Then my phone rang. A notification from the writing site had appeared. "Your scheduled post will be published in 4 days." I opened the app. A story was waiting in my drafts. The title was Neon Nihilist. The story described everything that had happened to me, beginning with the first comment and ending with the door opening into the dark room. The final paragraph was incomplete. The cursor blinked after one unfinished sentence. I have been writing horror stories online for about 4 years now, and tonight I finally learned who has been replying to Neon Nihilist. Below the sentence was an empty space. Waiting, I tried to delete the draft. The app closed. I reopened it. The story remained. I tried to delete my account. A message appeared. "You can't leave before the ending. I have not slept since then." 3 days have passed. The post is scheduled to go live tomorrow. Every few hours, another paragraph appears in the draft. I do not write them, but they describe exactly what I have done. This morning, a paragraph appeared about me placing a chair beneath the door handle. I had done that only minutes earlier. An hour ago, another line appeared. He finally understood that Neon Nihilist was not predicting the stories. It was reading them from the other side. I do not know what the other side means. I do not know whether the account belongs to my future self, my past self, or something that only looks like me. I only know that the story is almost complete. There is one final paragraph left. I can see the first line. Tomorrow, the readers will leave comments. The cursor is moving now. More words are appearing. I am not touching the keyboard. It says I will reply to every comment. It says I will stay in character. It says one reader will always comment first. I checked Neon Nihilist's profile again. The account creation date has changed. It no longer says 4 years ago. It says tomorrow. And beneath the date, there is a new sentence. "Thank you for writing me. My account has already replied. You're welcome." I did not write that. At least, I do not remember writing it. The scheduled post goes live in 6 minutes. The screen says Neon Nihilist is online. There is already a comment waiting beneath the story. It only says, now start from the beginning. Story 5. I remember how cruel I was to my brother when we were children. I made fun of almost everything about him. His hair was only a little darker than mine and our parents' hair, but I acted as if it proved he did not belong in our family. I mocked the way he always walked with his shoulders bent forward. I called him weak because his skin was pale and unhealthy looking. I laughed at his long arms, his thin body, and the way his clothes seemed to hang from him. There is no kind way to say it. I was a terrible sibling. He was born 1 year after me, and when we were young, he looked up to me more than anyone else. He wanted to play the games I played, watch the shows I watched, and follow me whenever I went outside. If I liked something, he liked it too. If I changed my mind, he changed his. I should have protected him. Instead, I treated his love like something embarrassing. I often told him to leave me alone. When my friends came over, I made him stay in his room. If he tried to join us, I called him annoying until he finally walked away. One of my favorite jokes was telling him that he had been adopted. I would wait until our parents were not around, then look at him seriously and say that Mom and Dad had found him somewhere else. I told him they had never admitted the truth because they were afraid he would cry. I knew it hurt him. That was the reason I kept doing it. His face would tighten, and his eyes would fill with that painful confusion children get when they do not know whether someone is joking. Sometimes he would ask me to stop. Other times he would run to our mother and ask if it was true. Mom became furious whenever she heard me saying it. I always defended myself the same way. It was only a joke, I would say. He's too sensitive. That is what bullies always say, isn't it? They hurt someone, then blame that person for feeling pain. Looking back now, I can only imagine what I looked like through my brother's eyes. I was the person he admired most, yet I was also the person who made him feel unwanted inside his own home. Until I was around 10 or 12, he still followed me everywhere. No matter how many times I pushed him away, he kept coming back. Maybe he believed I would eventually become the older sibling he wanted me to be. By the time I turned 14, something changed. My brother finally began pulling away. He stopped waiting for me after school. He stopped asking if he could come with me when I went out. At home, he avoided whatever room I was in. At the time, I thought it was wonderful. I thought I had finally gotten rid of him. Now I understand that he had simply realized I was not worth admiring. He spent most of his free time inside his bedroom. He only came out for meals or when our parents called him. Sometimes I heard music coming through his door, but I never knocked. I never asked if he was okay. Home should have been the place where he felt safe. Because of me, it probably felt like another place he had to survive. When I was 16 and he was 15, he became interested in the goth and emo styles that were popular at the time. He started wearing black clothes, even during the warmer months. He grew his hair longer and listened to bands I had never heard of. He also began collecting old books with worn covers and strange symbols printed inside them. I did not understand any of it. Instead of leaving him alone, I found new reasons to make fun of him. I told him he was only dressing that way to get attention. I said the music he listened to was awful. I called the books fake and accused him of pretending to read them because he wanted people to think he was mysterious. He rarely argued back. That only encouraged me. Soon, some students at school began joining in. They probably would not have cared about him if I had not made him an easy target. I was his sibling. If I treated him like a joke, everyone else felt they had permission to do the same. I still remember one afternoon when he tried hiding from my friends and me near the back of the school. He had pressed himself into the corner beside a row of lockers, hoping we would walk past. We saw him. I blocked his way while my friends laughed behind me. I do not remember every word I said. Maybe that is my mind trying to protect me. But I remember his expression. His face tightened in the same way it had when we were children, and I told him he was adopted. He looked hurt, but he also looked tired. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. He had already learned that begging me to stop would not change anything. I hate myself when I remember that moment. I wish I could say our relationship improved when I left for college, but that would be a lie. The bullying stopped only because we stopped seeing each other. He lived his life, and I lived mine. We met perhaps twice a year at our parents' house, usually during Christmas or another family event. Even then, we barely spoke. I never asked for his phone number. I did not know his email address. I knew almost nothing about his friends, his work, or what he wanted from life. Our parents sometimes tried to bring us together. I always found an excuse to avoid it. All the blame belongs to me. He never did anything to deserve my hatred. I never even apologized. 2 years ago, during Christmas dinner, Mom told me my brother had moved to the same city where I lived. She said he had mentioned me several times and would be happy if we could put the past behind us. I did not give her a real answer. I changed the subject and never contacted him. At that point in my life, I thought I was doing well. I had a good job, a nice apartment, an expensive car, and a partner who seemed to love me. I believed I had become successful because I was stronger and smarter than everyone else. Maybe part of me already knew that facing my brother would force me to remember what kind of person I had been. Maybe I was afraid karma would notice me if I finally admitted what I had done. I visited his apartment twice during those 2 years, but only because our father asked me to. Both times, my brother was away at a conference. Dad almost begged me to check the place, water the plants, and make sure there were no leaks. I agreed reluctantly. The first time I entered the apartment, I was surprised. It was warm, clean, and comfortable. There were plants near the windows, framed pictures on the walls, and shelves filled with books. The place did not feel lonely. It felt like someone who was happy lived there. I had expected something dark and depressing. Instead, my brother's home felt more alive than mine. He still collected things I considered strange. There were small figures on the shelves, some shaped like animals and others like creatures from old stories. Several old books were displayed inside a glass cabinet. Their covers were cracked, and some were written in languages I could not understand. Years earlier, I would have mocked him for those things. But inside that apartment, they did not seem like desperate attempts to appear different. They were simply objects he cared about. He had built a life around his own interests, without needing my approval. Both times I visited, he left a bottle of good wine for me on the kitchen counter. There was always a short note thanking me for helping. I ignored the gifts. I told myself I did not want anything from him. Now I am not sure whether that was arrogance or shame. Perhaps I knew that accepting the wine would mean accepting his attempt to make peace. About a week before last Christmas, my life began falling apart. My partner left me for someone else. I later discovered they had been seeing each other for months. Around the same time, I got into a serious argument with my boss. I had been making mistakes at work, but instead of accepting responsibility, I blamed everyone around me. By the time our family Christmas party arrived, I was angry, embarrassed, and drinking far too much. My brother was there. He sat with our parents and told them about his work. He had been promoted. He had traveled to several countries for conferences, and he seemed genuinely excited about the future. I watched our parents smile at him. Instead of feeling happy, I felt jealous. He had become everything I believed he could never be.